So it's not just waiting for the condition to reoccur and then treating it, it's using preventative measures all along the way. You know, the woman who's a nurse who works all night long is not going to be the best candidate for a home birth unless she changes some very basic structures about her life. How she eats at work, how she takes care of herself, how she gets any sleep with a 2-year-old at home. All these things are things that we, in an hour appointment, can address in a much more significant way than a 10-minute appointment in a doctor's office. So that's why we feel so strongly that likely to reoccur in a midwifery setting is vastly different than likely to reoccur in an obstetrical setting. Thank you.
Also, as far as legislative intent, Shannon, we did leave the word risk out intentionally in the process. All of us together decided that that idea of quantifiable low and high risk wasn't going to work here. And that's part of the reason we came up with the language we did, because we did want to avoid that word. I'm not sure how much we're being able to avoid it here, but it was part of the intent.
So, I just want to make sure I'm understanding you, Sarah. So, when you drafted the legislation, the intent was not to include possible risks in this as much as it was to include pre-existing actual disease or conditions that could affect the current pregnancy. And if I'm thinking correctly, that would leave out most of the history ofs that don't leave a change to the woman that will impact the current pregnancy. You know, as you mentioned before, prior cesarean section does impact the current pregnancy. We all know it does, and nobody disputes that. But the fact that the woman may be at slightly higher increased risk of a postpartum hemorrhage because she had one before is a much grayer area. And I think we need to parse these out and get down to the meat of discussing what truly is a prior condition or disease.
It's pre-existing. In other words, it exists.
Pre-existing disease.
It existed before.
Which implies that the pre-existing condition has it now.
Doesn't it? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, doesn't pre-existing means pre-existing the pregnancy
Right.
and currently existing.
Currently existing.
Right. Interesting.
My concern is that it says any pre-existing maternal disease or condition. So it's talking about something that existed during a pregnancy. And so it would be a lot easier for me if we could just say she has to currently have it. But it's really talking about something that occurred during, you know, it includes that as I read it.
It's pre-existing and it's active.
Yeah. Pre-existing in medical terms always means she had it before and she has it now.
If I can speak without interruption for a moment, that when we classified and just went with normal and didn't do a stratification of risk, that was with the understanding was there were certain situations where there would be physician involvement to be able to have that input, and you wouldn't define it in statute because it's so difficult, it's such a personal assessment there. So it's not that we don't care about the level of risk, it was just we were not going to define it in statute.
That would definitely be why somebody who has a, cardiovascular disease or hematological disorder or essential hypertension, that would be the risks associated with that would be why anyone is supposed to have the physician exam. Definitely. But those are all existing, currently existing conditions or diseases. And there's risks associated with them to the pregnancy. So yeah, it's not that the idea of risk goes away, but we did actively choose not to use those terms because of the difficulty in quantifying low versus high risk.
Referring back to the practice guidelines, there is under M, adverse obstetrical history that may impact on the current pregnancy. So it's something long-standing, recognized by the professionals in this room that you need to.
We wouldn't include these bullet points. That may impact, but if they're not likely to, then
And you have down here other known conditions likely to impact the pregnancy.
I think we actually thought
The
that
judgment of the midwife.
that in drafting the statute that likely to affect the pregnancy was actually working towards having more latitude for the midwife than may. But may was basically, that could be actually broader, and likely to is actually more limited.
Right, but the history of conditions that we have listed here are much more narrow than likely. They're things that may impact the pregnancy, maybe, but
So some of those where you're looking at this individual patient and you're making that assessment, your judgment is going to come into play. So if we're looking at the history of postpartum hemorrhage requiring transfusion, whether that's likely to impact the current pregnancy, you're going to use your judgment to say, I think it's not likely to impact the current pregnancy. And you may decide not to make the referral. Now, if something goes wrong and the board receives a complaint, that case will be referred to a midwifery consultant who is going to look at the records and everything that you had at your disposal and make a determination whether further investigation is necessary. And he or she may look at that and say, given the information that they had, I agree that not using hindsight's 20/20, but in that moment when they made this decision, I would have, or not even I, because it's not personal, it's the community standard of care. The standard of care would agree with this judgment, and it wasn't a breach not to refer for a physician consult. And then further investigation is done if the consultant says this is a problem, and there may be interviews, further exploration, and an expert would have to be retained who would be the person who would testify if it went to hearing. So judgment is built in to each of these.
So, okay, I want to be sure I understand.
So are you saying that just because it's on this list, a referral is not absolutely indicated if we don't believe it's likely to impact the pregnancy? Is that what you're saying? Strike that. Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
It's because I thought we are
No, you're-
creating a list that absolutely requires a referral, correct?
These things are going to require referral.
And so our job today is to determine whether it's likely or not likely to impact
Well-
the current pregnancy.
Right. It's our job is to say what is on this list. We are making the determination now
Likely.
that it is
If it
likely.
stays there.
I apologize for that. Yeah.
Yeah, how, are we just coming to that decision by consensus then? As Ms. Dobbs said, that likely is a term that is nebulous and we're going to all just have to decide together, is a 1% risk of it happening again likely, or does it need to be 75%? That these are items that likely is an interpretation we're all making here today, correct?
I think likely in the legal sense is that it's over 50%.
Thank you.
Now, Ms. Dobbs, do you want to speak to that? I mean, likely is a word that.
No, I agree with you. I mean, and I think the important thing here is we are here working on these regulations. You guys work in the industry, and we're here with ACOG as well. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to come up with something that's going to be workable and that's going to protect consumers. And that's what we're doing here. So if you say likely is more than 50%, then that's what we're going to go with. As long as you can assure us that this regulation we're coming up with is providing the required consumer protection.
Hi, my name's Yen. I'm OBGYN here at UC Davis, or just across the town from here. I think it's dangerous to just say likely is 50% when looking at this, when trying to determine the regulations for this statute. I think it depends on the consequences of what is likely to occur. Are we talking about a history of pulmonary embolism that's likely to reoccur at 10%, but she might die from that PE? Right. You know, versus high blood pressure, which is likely to recur at greater than 50%, but high blood pressure is high blood pressure. It doesn't always develop into severe preeclampsia. So I think we have to be very, very careful about using a specific percentage.
I agree, because the stakes really do matter.
The problem for the attorneys is that likely is a term of art, and it's preponderance of the evidence. It's more likely than not. And, you know, we have to assume that the word was chosen for a reason. Now, through consensus, there may be some things where the midwives, they know this is not safe because even though there's only a 10% risk, the consequences are so significant that we really do want a physician consult on this. And their standard of practice may require it even though this statute or these regulations don't. So that's the kind of the interplay between the community standard of practice and what we have to do for purposes of these regulations. So, maybe that'll help us frame the discussion.
I think it's also really relevant that conditions that are likely to cause something like, for example, embolism, like we don't want that to happen, just like you don't. And so we don't need a number on that. We're real clear about that. There's, with every condition, we know the consequences and we know what fits, we know what we can handle and what we can't. So we don't actually have any confusion about that. And we don't need a percentage to decide that. We know what falls into midwifery care and what doesn't.
I hope I'm not beating a dead horse, Faith Gibson, licensed midwife. But the difference between possible and probable, I've talked to a variety of midwives in the last few weeks that none of us would attend a birth